Alright, so for today's video, I figured we would talk about some decks that are the best in the format right now because YCS Dortmund is coming up and there's other events and we have a whole new format ahead of us. And yeah, I'm just super excited to talk about which decks can actually be at the top and like be the most represented and something you will encounter at YCS Dortmund because there are so many decks available. There's so much diversity in the meta and yeah, I would really love for us to have this discussion. So please share all of your thoughts in the comments down below and like the video if you like it as well. So for the first deck, of course, we have to talk about Unchained. It's really cool that Unchained sort of came as a bit of a surprise into the meta and people, at least in my opinion, were kind of expecting the support to not do that much. We figured that it's nice or solid maybe, but then it really proved itself kind of incredible and the deck is still able to hang in there right now even after more people are familiar with what it does. There's a bunch of content out there, you know, in terms of like how to beat it or how to play around things or whatever. There's like a ton of things about Unchained out there. But there are also guides about how to play around hand traps that people will use against you. So like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that people that play against Unchained and also the Unchained players right now are working really hard to be able to do both of these things. So Unchained, it's still proving itself and still has incredible results, but people can also combat it either with decks that have good matchups against Unchained, which we will also talk about, or just with non-engine. And yeah, you know, Unchained is still hanging in there and it is still at the top. It's just very, oh my god, I have some, my hair just fell in my eye. It's just very, very good because it is consistent at doing what it does, and I think that's kind of key. It's also not that easy to disrupt the deck in the correct time. You really need to be familiar with the combos and the deck's weaknesses, and even then, there aren't many impactful hand traps against the deck, and some people say Nibiru, but that can also be played around quite easily actually. And with all that in mind, you know, you have this nice mid-range contender that's just able to consistently do well and put up boards that put up just enough disruptions for you to, you know, survive and continue playing the game and grinding because you have a ton of resources available to you. Your graveyard has additional stuff which you don't need to use unless you're like disrupted or threatened. So you always have follow-up, and not to mention that any kind of destruction that gets used against you is just going to give you pluses at the end of the day. So your opponent has to come up with ways to combat your board without actual destruction. And then actually like being able to play through some disruptions that you also put up, or like a floodgate, which is the Nightmare Griffin. They also have non-engine because you have enough space to play that as well. So yeah, amazing contender right now, even with people knowing what the deck does. And I think this really proves that Unchained is not just here because it's like, you know, interesting for a short period of time. I think it's actually here to stay. And speaking of another deck that's been hanging in there for quite a while, it's Pearly. You know, with the deck actually coming out last winter and then all the players had to wait for the support and then the deck got hit and then we had to wait for a good format again. And right now with Pearly being quite dominant for some time, I think it's still going to be. And it's actually cool because mainly what Pearly was hurt by is the fact that mostly people play book cards because of Kashtira, and then book cards just were really good in the Pearly matchup as well. So Pearly just couldn't really, you know, perform as well as it can right now with Kashtira moving out of the meta. And also it's kind of like, I think book cards are still really nice against the deck, but since there are other decks to think about right now and all the diversity that I talked about, and not to mention Unchained, maybe players just will simply not have the space to actually respect Pearly, and Pearly is definitely going to use that and take advantage of that. And just looking at the deck by itself, it has been able to do very good things. Like going first, they are able to establish sometimes a Noir, which is nice, obviously, but also just being able to put up an XYZ and have all of the follow-up that my friend Pearly will grant you. Field spell protection is amazing. Your non-engine that you can play and really tailor it to fit the meta. Like everything just is great for Pearly, honestly. And for going second, they never really struggle with that either. So yeah, I think that, with Kashtira and book cards in the meta, Pearly just couldn't really shine, but I think now is really the time for it, and I think that's kind of great. Moving on to another deck, I want to talk about dragons, and I genuinely believe that the hits from the ban list, they helped definitely with sort of taming the power of dragons, or I should say the consistency of dragons, and the power is actually still there, because if you look at their boards, they are able to establish pretty much the same boards, albeit less consistently. So that's literally the only thing. And also just, I guess, Magnamut to 1 is kind of horrible because you don't get to get your dragon search, which was really, really crucial a lot of times. Hitting consistency is always going to impact a deck, but dragons can be played very mid-rangey, which is nice because you're able to play all of the non-engine to like combat the meta and then also put up your board, which is still achievable. So in my opinion, the deck is going to shine in the next format, also because Kashtira is gone and Arise Heart mainly, which was the biggest, like the bane of Dragon Link's existence pretty much. And yeah, not to mention Shifter, which is still going to be in the format, but like Shifter is just going to be played by Flunder, which isn't that consistent, and also Exosister, which aren't that amazing. So that's pretty much it. I still think dragons can shine, like I said. And I guess speaking of Flunder, I want to address why I don't have it on the list, which I don't today, but I still wanted to mention it just because it's kind of like, I think Flunder was just the correct choice for the particular YCS that it won. The player expected and other Flunder players expected Unchained to be really popular, which it was, and Flunder just has a very nice matchup because you don't special summon. So your special summon, your non-existent special summon monsters cannot be hurt by, by Unchained that just has everything to do with special summon monsters. So, there's that. Also, just Flunder being Flunder, it just does annoying things and has Shifters. So yeah, I was able to do well, but it is still struggling with consistency. And the second people are like, okay, Flunder is in the meta, we're just gonna play, Impermanence, Veiler, Draw, and all of that. And then I think you should be fine against Flunder. So yeah, just when people realize Flunder is still there and they like try to respect it, it's not gonna be that great. And now with a YCS win, I think players are gonna, I guess, pay attention to it. So I don't think it's going to be at the top of the meta. And we have another deck that I also wanted to talk about because it's not on the list. But let's continue with the decks that are on the list. The next one is going to be Tearlament. And yeah, Tear is just, it's so interesting because it can just make insane boards. Sometimes the mills are amazing and you're just able to put up a lot of disruptions and you have a shufflers in the graveyard, and it pretty much almost feels like the old Tearlaments. But in other instances, you kind of just can't really get there. It's really important for you to actually hit with having that little amount of names. So right now what tier players have been trying to do for some time is incorporating engines to help them, and we have seen many different things being played with Tearlaments. And I also want to mention that from Age of Overlord, which is not out yet, the Horus engine is probably going to be really nice in tier, so there's another engine to look out for. So yeah, Tearlament I think is going to be strong. But other engines included Heroes and Shaddolls, and just you can play with like the Monodium stuff if you want, with visas, and incorporate those cards if you're trying to play it that way. It offers you a lot because the stuff that you put up on the board is good to combat the meta decks. If you look at the ability to make an XYZ that's rank 4, obviously Abyss Dweller is great against Unchained. Being able to put up Rolkalos, which negates a special summon. Also Kaleido Heart, shuffling back and not destroying. Like, you just have very decent forms of removal and disruption. You are mostly reliant on engine though. You actually want your plays to do something. So it's not one of those decks that like plays a lot of non-engine and just really thrives off of being able to play non-engine. You actually want your cards to do things in the graveyard. So there is that, but once they do, I think you have enough power to actually beat decks, even going second sometimes with engine. And I really think that's the beauty of tier, especially if you play it well. So that's something to really emphasize on. I think you need to be skilled enough with the deck to play it well and actually do well. But I think there's also just, again, beauty in learning and just trying to do well just got really emotional for some reason. Moving on to the last deck on the list, we have Branded Chimera. So this deck just has a very good Unchained matchup. It's, well, very good. It has a good Unchained matchup. So being able to just banish with Mirror Jade is amazing because, again, no destruction. You know, you just want the decks right now or forms of removal that don't include any type of destruction. And just being able to play all of the non-engine is really working in favor of the deck. And you still have Ash, yes, and D-Barrier. Those two are the most important. But with Ash, you're always able to, or almost always able to bait it. And I guess D-Barrier is like the only thing that I guess you're afraid of. But at the end of the day, it is just this one card, and sometimes it's just going to happen. You're going to get debarriered. And even if it happens, it just might be in one game and you still win the other two. I know that's not really that positive, and yes, debarrier exists. But other than that, the deck has the ability to rip a card and put negations in the graveyard, put up a Mirror Jade, have hand traps in the hand, and I think that's pretty much enough to be a good deck right now. Not to mention that there is no Arise Heart, no Shifter as much. There's not as much Shifter in the meta, so your graveyard is mostly safe, which is great. So yeah, you know, that's pretty much going to be it for the decks, but I also wanted to talk about Rescue Ace. So Rescue Ace and Flunder didn't make the top 5 decks list, but I want your thoughts if you feel like some of these decks on my list should be taken off it and maybe Rescue Ace makes an appearance, or Flunder even if you think it's viable. But with Rescue Ace, it's kind of like sometimes the consistency isn't there, but for the most part, it's just not that easy to go second. You really want your emergency to go through, and also turbulence. Those are choke points. So if your turbulence gets disrupted and you don't have an emergency also to like dodge a targeting negation or something like that, it's going to be really hard to do something. So there's that to think about, and there is going to be targeting negation present in the meta. But the deck is still a very, very solid mid-range contender. You are just able to put up, it's like, you know, you put up enough disruptions, very similar to Unchained and all of these decks, because if you've seen the pattern of mid-range decks in the format, there's a lot of them. There are combo decks, but they aren't as represented or as powerful in a lot of cases. And with Rescue Ace, you put up your disruptions, and you're also able to access a lot of utility in your extra deck, which is so important because a lot of times like extra decks are just so tight and you're not able to fit in all of these, like, I don't know, some types of removal, etc. But with Rescue Ace, you're really able to afford that. And there's different things that Rescue Ace plays, like Ibli, and you know, just a lot of players are trying to develop good ways of building the deck. And post Age of Overlord is going to be really good with the Snake Eye cards. So there's a lot of potential in the deck, is what I'm getting at. And I think we should definitely respect Rescue Ace, even if it's not on the list. But it's literally on the 6th place, so it's not that far behind. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like it and share all of your thoughts. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.